Good evening. My name is Sister Kathy Duffy, and as the director of the Institute for Religion and Science at Chestnut Hill College, I would like to welcome you to the college's Sugarloaf campus and to this evening's event. A particularly warm welcome to those who are here for the first time. Is there anyone here for the first time? Wonderful. Great. I hope you come again. After having sponsored science and religion lectures ever since 1997, about eight years ago, in 1911, we were finally able to establish the Institute for Religion and Science. The aim of our institute is to promote the constructive engagement of religion, spirituality with science and technology, and to encourage dialogue that is interfaith, multi-science, and civil. To this end, we sponsor lectures, like the one we're having this evening, 2 reading circles, and other events, and hope to continue to broaden our offerings. So do check our website, which you see here, and you can find, what's coming up next. And if you haven't signed, if you were not on our mailing list, be sure you sign in the back, and we'll probably send something out once a month. We don't really do it too often, but we want to keep you apprised of our events. As many of you already know, this year we are collaborating with the Omega Center over at Villanova and presenting a conference from December 6th to 8th here at the Sugarloaf campus. It's called Love at the Heart of the Cosmos, Living in Relational Wholeness. And this conference will feature some very important Teilhard scholars, not scholarships, unfortunately. Now, although the tickets sold out very quickly, there's still a chance for you to join our live streaming. So you'll see, if you go to our website, you'll see how to do that. The advantage, of course, of live streaming is that you can sit back and relax as you watch everything. You don't have to get all dressed up and that kind of thing. So, and you would receive access to those videos, for the next 3 or 6 months. I'm not sure which. On another note, a group of scientists who meet every year to discuss science and religion have formulated a petition, I know many of you know this, asking Pope Francis to proclaim Teilhard de Chardin a doctor of the Church. Now, if you'd like to sign that petition, there's a link on our website. So just go to the bottom of the home page and, you can fill it out. And we keep gathering more signatures. We were going to send it last summer, and then we got a whole raft of more. And we have the potential of, doing some work in Europe. And so we think we'll wait a little longer, so you still have time. Now, our time together tonight will flow in the following way. Our guests will present their lecture, and we have 2 speakers this evening, and they'll take turns and be, informing you on the topic. I'll introduce them in a minute. And then after the lecture section is finished, we'll do what we usually do and form small circles, maybe of 5 people, something like that, so you can talk about what you just heard. We like you to have a chance to talk. Sometimes you go home and nobody wants to hear what you heard, or you forget what you heard. And this way you have time to kind of let it sink in and bring it into another level. I think the more of our senses that we use, the more we retain. And once that's finished, then we'll have our speakers entertain questions, suggestions, comments, whatever you'd like to offer. Now, I have the privilege of introducing our guests. So, Father Christopher J. Corbally, S.J., is eminently qualified to be with us this evening. Who is that? With a BS in physics, that was a good beginning, from Bristol University, a PhD in astronomy from the University of Toronto, BD, which is what, Bachelor of Divinity in Theology, and a pastoral diploma from Heathrow College, London. He's one of those persons who speaks the language on both sides of the science-religion dialogue. His experience is also stellar, if you can excuse the pun. He served for many years as research astronomer at the Vatican Observatory and until 2012 as vice director for the Vatican Observatory Research Group in Tucson, Arizona. Chris is a member of the Royal Astronomical Society, the American Astronomical Society, and president of the National Committee for Astronomy in the Vatican City State for the International Astronomical Union. He was president of that organization's Division 4, which is concerned with stars. And from 2009 to 2011, and that was from 2009 to 2012. And he is also a member of the Institute on Religion and Science. No, Religion in an Age of Science. Their name is so much like ours. So Institute on Religion in an Age of Science, for which he was president for some years. Father Corbelly's research interests include multiple star systems, stellar spectral classification, peculiar and metal-weak stars, activity in solar-type stars, galactic structure and star formation regions, and telescope technology. He's had a long-term interest in interdisciplinary questions and is currently studying the characteristics of human sentience in the context of evolution. And Margaret Boone-Rappaport is a cultural anthropologist and biologist who earned her doctorate at the Ohio State University. Presently, she works in the areas of human cognitive evolution and science and religion, and serves as a futurist, a lecturer, and a science fiction writer. She's lectured in sociology and anthropology at Georgetown and George Washington Universities, and she is co-founder with Chris of the Human Sentience Project. Both she and both Margaret and Chris have founded this, co-founded, I don't know, it went away. They've co-founded the Human Sentience Project, LLC, in Tucson, Arizona. Margaret's research interests encompass biological anthropology, cultural anthropology, science and religion, ecotheology, as well as Mars colonization, spaceflight, and neuroplasticity. Dr. Rappaport is also a prize-winning short story and poetry writer. Chris and Margaret have recently published a book with Routledge entitled The Emergence of Religion in Human Evolution. A volume published in this series, Routledge Studies in Neurotheology, Cognitive Science, and Religion. And it's edited by Andy Newberg, who's been here a couple times, and some of you might remember him. He was hopefully coming for dinner tonight, but wasn't able in the end. This book is a cutting-edge examination of the evolutionary origins of humanity's intersection with the supernatural. So we're really privileged to have Chris and Margaret come here this evening to share their cutting-edge research with us as they wend their way eventually to Tucson, Arizona. So let's welcome Father Chris Corbelly and Dr. Margaret Boone-Rappaport to the Institute for Religion and Science at Chestnut Hill College. There you go. Now you can make the changes.
Beware the snakes.
Beware the snakes?
Go? Yeah. Okay. Hello, can you hear me? Yes, okay. Good evening, Philadelphia. We're so happy to be here. The town of brotherly love and sisterly love, too. I grew up in Washington, so I've come up to Philadelphia all my life. Chris, on the other hand, was born outside of London, but we were born in the exact same year. We are the exact same age. We were born the year after the World War II ended, and we both had fathers in the Air Force. Now, Chris's father was in the Royal Air Force, and he bombed Hitler's Germany. And he did a very unusual thing. He came back. Almost all of them died. So, I hate to tell, well, I don't hate to tell you, I'm quite proud to tell you, but my father wasn't a fighter pilot. He worked in the Pentagon. He worked for the U.S. Army, and when the U.S. Air Force peeled off, my dad planned the accounting system for the U.S. Air Force. Yes. So anyway, we both are Air Force brats in kind of a way, and the exact same age. We want to tell you a story. This is a story about science, but it is also about religion. I'm going to speak to you for just about 5 minutes, and then Chris is going to give you our model. The story is about the evolution of human religious capacity, and it draws on scientific findings that shore up our conclusion that religion is a non-obligatory neurocognitive trait of our species, Homo sapiens. The chapters in iBook take the reader on a fascinating 65 million year story, a journey back through the evidence that human religious thinking has a natural organic foundation. It will not provide guidance on how to be spiritual, but it will hopefully make readers more comfortable with the idea that their pursuit of religious experience is reasonable, that it has an origin in the evolution of our species, and that religious thinking is not unusual or weak or some sign of a less advanced way of being. We two authors both strongly hold that the institutional role of religion is to support the social group, whatever that social group happens to be. If it strays into other purposes that are economic or political, or if it is co-opted somehow for the purpose of activities that degrade, malign, or maim anyone, then that's no longer religion the way we see it. We present an evolutionary model, but it's of a trait that's a biological inheritance, but it is, like I say, an option, like the cognitive capacity for reading. You can choose not to do it. We come from two very different backgrounds, but we meet in the middle in search of an explanation for why humans in society after society worldwide and throughout the history of humans on Earth have pursued this thing called religion. One of us is an anthropologist and one of us is an astronomer, both trained in the sciences. One of us is a Presbyterian and one of us is an ordained Catholic priest. In this joint enterprise, we come to the study of religion obliquely from a broader interest in how and why humans think differently from other species. Religious thinking is just one of the differences. There are many differences. We delve into scientific findings, always with an eye toward our baseline of knowledge. And what is that? That is archaeology. Whatever projections are made into the prehistory by the new cognitive archaeology, we must adhere to the evidence that comes out of the ground. It's analysis and reanalysis, because methods get better. Human evolution is documented not only in our own genome and every cell of our body, but in the painstaking work of field researchers bent over archaeological digs. Our book is a science book, but it helps to illuminate the origins of spiritual life in our species. The pastiche we present is fragmentary in some ways, like our knowledge of the human genome. We present findings on some of the few known genes that affect religious thinking. There will be many more genes identified. Just as old movies from the 1920s were black, white, and flickering, the sweep of our story is smooth but incomplete, sewn together by logic, but firm in the conviction that something like this must have happened, because here we are today with this unique tendency to think about the imaginary and label it supernatural, to find sustenance and peace in mild to radical altered states of consciousness, and to frame stories and rules to guide our children about tales from unusual, otherworldly, and hallowed beings who lived once long ago. Spirits, ancestors, gods, we call them by different names. Our goal is to be informative, a bit provocative, and to convey our sense of excitement about all the new scientific findings that are rapidly emerging from the work of so many around the world. We rely on a multidisciplinary story, cultural anthropology, stones and bones archaeology, the new cognitive archaeology, cognitive science in the laboratory, genetics, population genetics, which is different, human genomics, paleoneurology, and neuroscience. We address all beliefs and all humans, living and extinct. It can be easy to forget in all the scientific terminology that this story is about us. In mankind's long progression from among the ancient Miocene apes of Africa, he has sought release, amusement, delight, and escape from the self-consciousness that evolution handed him. It is a heavy burden we carry to see ourselves on a timeline, to know of our ultimate demise, to realize that mistakes can be made that hurt others, and to willingly accept the ultimate control of the social group. All of this is a burden that needs healing. We as a species were dealt a heavy blow. We know right from wrong. We live self-consciously and tentatively, and we relish the experiences that can shoulder part of that burden, just a little bit of our time on Earth. So that's a nice little introduction. The next part of our presentation, Chris is going to give you, and it's going to be our model of the origins of moral thinking in Homo erectus, and the origins, finally, of religious thinking in Homo sapiens.
I left this up because lessons from neuroscience, lessons from the hearth. Actually, I'm going to do lessons from the hearth, and then Margaret is more going to do lessons from neuroscience. But it looks well that way anyway. The other thing is that the original typo was lessons from the heart. with a T without the H. And yes, that's also true as well. So, yeah, that was a happy mistake. The other thing that Kathy kindly put up our book there, coming out, it should be ready for your Christmas stocking, okay? If we can get through, we're finishing the proof reading at the moment in production, so stand by for your Christmas stocking. But the other book, Space Science and Astronomy Theatre, that's full of stories, little plays that Margaret wrote with my sort of help and input on the science for teachers, for many high school teachers, helping teach culture and science and introduce students to that and maybe finding their careers in that. Stories then are so important. So this is our story that Margaret and I are telling this evening. At the back, you won't be able to read this. If you'd like to come up a little further, then do. But I don't want to tax your eyes, even if they've just had wonderful cataracts removed. So, that's main points. Looking at how we know good from bad and put it into practice. So that's my part of this talk, does depend on social and demographic factors that encourage moral systems to merge in Homo. And we're now particularly talking about Homo erectus. So let's look a little small, admittedly. Australopithecines, no, not yet Homo. In between is Homo habilis, around little more than 2 million years, 2.5 million years ago. 8 million years. Oh, I'm getting that wrong. Okay, let's go for 8 million years for Homo habilis. No, 2.8. Thank you. I thought that was around right. Okay, 2. Astronomers anyway have ballpark, as you well know. So, order of magnitude, 2 or 20. It's the same. Yeah, for astronomers. It's a universe we're talking about after all. Go on. So anyway, Homo habilis pops in between, but Homo erectus is very important, around 2 million years ago, coming from Homo habilis. A lot of changes from habilis to erectus. And particularly we're looking at something called the human hearth, or human heart if you like. Because what Homo erectus was able to do, get control of fire. No longer was fire something that lightning did and just happened as natural. They could control it, maybe first of all from getting some fire that lightning had struck, and then keeping it, husbanding it. And so controlling that fire would then bring the community, and now around 100, 110 strong, together around that fire in the early evening, keeping warm, keeping safe, having, as it were, that circle of light, that circle of safety. Beyond that, there was danger and all kinds of things. And it's in that circle that we are beginning to get the gems or the seeds of morality and putting it into action. Certainly a group that large needs a structure. And, okay, so that's the group size. Homo erectus was quite a strider. As the name implies, stood up straight and could cover a lot of territory, 100 square miles, compared with the Australopithecines of only 10 square miles. Territory was getting bigger. Finally, of course, Homo sapiens migrating out of Africa, so the territory becoming huge. But language, yes, for morality, language is needed, and there seems to be good as it were, certainly good research to suggest that Homo erectus did have language. Certainly Homo erectus, and actually Homo habilis before Homo erectus, had the little stirrup-like bone in the throat that supported the voice box and so enables our speech. So things were getting together, certainly on the social and democratic way. And we've been getting into the physical factors as well as we're talking about that. Physical factors of genus Homo and genus Australopithecus sort of compared here. Australopithecus, Homo erectus, Homo sapiens down there. These attributes at least correlate with encouraging, the advent of moral systems. One thing, of course, is cranial capacity, how big your brain is. Double the size in Homo erectus about from Australopithecus. It's getting much more of a, computing engine. And, in the region of double, certainly 50% larger in Homo sapiens. Lots more, as it were, of the neocortex ratio, which is the ratio of the neocortex to the rest of the brain, as it were, the real sort of computing power there. Gait, posture, and build, I've talked about Homo erectus as opposed to Homo habilis, who is much more ape-like. Homo erectus was tall, standing up tall, able to cover a large territory. So changes there. Sexual dimorphism, so the difference between the male and the female, definitely distinct difference in the earlier Australopithecines. By the time of Homo erectus, very much less difference between the male and the female, and then further reduced for Homo sapiens. Why is that important? Well, the sexes, the male and the female, could be taking, as it were, complementary roles much more so as the size and the physical size differed less. And particularly as the age of the oldest members grew older, grew larger and larger. So 40, maybe 45. So they were, in those terms, quite old. There were grandmothers and grandfathers among them. So we have the grandmother hypothesis, that the grandmothers for Homo erectus were important in the nurturing of the grandchildren and bringing them along. They were the ones who could care and pass on skills and, we would claim, the values of good and bad. And maybe around the circle, of the fire at night. So around the hearth or the heart of all this. Yeah, I hope you see our friends Homo sapiens, if you can't read this at the back, and there is our Homo erectus on the bottom, just illustrations to keep in mind there. But so what we need for morality, you needn't remember all these, but this is what Margaret and I reckoned is needed to make a moral decision and a moral process. You've got to have a mental step both back and up. You've got to step back from what's going on and be able to think about it. You've got to have an arbitration mechanism that operates along a timeline, past, present, future. You've got to see these in order to see the good and the bad and to weigh them in the past, present, and future. An evaluation using a valence from good to bad. Yes, that's implied there. A regretfully dispassionate reasoning. Oh, don't worry too much about these. Hopefully we'll have time to tell you a little story at the end which will illustrate everything. Okay? Attentiveness is in a mental balancing act. You've got to have that. A sad rejection of wantonness. You can't do what you like, and it can be a bit sad not to be able to do what you like. A capacity for empathy with someone receiving moral judgment. Maybe good, maybe bad. Rejoice with the good and you're sad about the bad. The experience of a burden. The resolution on the part of the group. Yes, this is needed for the group's survival and activity. Hope and faith in the future on the part of the group. Okay? So, don't need you to remember all these, but you have the sense of what's, a moral act and action within a group is like. Now, a model for moral decision-making in Homo erectus and later in Homo sapiens, because, of course, Homo sapiens takes up the morality, with spades, as it were. Required element, timeline, exploration, maker and arbiter, valence from good to bad. Here we have the relevant context of these various attributes, and then the theoretical basis for them. So kind of a mental step and a judging of good and bad. That's really what these are about. Sorry, I know you can't read them from the back, but there's a lot in there. One of the things is timeline. This had clearly been happening before Homo erectus, but Homo erectus, because Homo habilis means, the handyman, okay? So Homo habilis could make tools. Homo erectus very certainly could. To make a tool, you need to have a timeline. You've got to have a mental image. That needs something, a real ability, a mental image of what you want to make. So you're looking to the future of this piece of stone, this rock that you've found. You've got to, have found it. You've got to, each time you bang it, it's called napping, and shape it, got to compare it with your image. Is it looking like what I'm mentally picturing it should look like? So hence the timeline that is needed, making something, as it were, as simple but and yet as complex as a stone tool. So that's needed. Obviously, we spoke about that for morality, and then the mental apparatus needed. Exploration maker and arbiter, left hemisphere interpreter. That sounds wonderful. Thanks to Gazzaniga, an idea. We need something in our mind. Okay, left hemisphere, here we go. If you all like to touch your left hemisphere. There's something in there that keeps generating explanations. And this is one of the abilities which helps us think and helps us plan. And some of them might be, quite wacky, quite out of the way, but it keeps doing. And then obviously the rest of the neocortex needs to say, and does this correspond with reality? But we certainly need that. And neuroscience will telling, yes, there's a running interpreter that constantly makes up explorations. And Homo erectus had this part of the brain developed, we can see from the skull shapes. Valence from good to bad, yes. That, what actions are going to help the community as they go about their business in the hunting and survival and their meetings together around the human hearth and amidst the circle of light. So, these things, fine. Philosophy, but that no doubt for later generations and ourselves, what's the philosophy of the good and bad, but some certainly sense of a grounding in the good and bad, in the good in their community and their ways. I think I should leave that there and ask Margaret to continue.
Can I use this? Ooh, hello. Couple follow-up points to Chris's presentation. We presented Australopithecines, Homo erectus, Homo sapiens as a series, and I think the tide is turning on that. I think that more and more archaeologists are not seeing the Australopithecines as the origin of the genus Homo. The fact of the matter is that the division of the genus Homo from the apes is not documented. I never thought it worked very well because the Australopithecines have the wrong dimensions. They've got long arms and short legs. Homo habilis, tiny little Homo habilis, about 3 feet high, had a bigger brain, he had shorter arms and longer legs that we all have and we all use. So I think that that's just a quick follow-up to that. One other point from Chris's portion, the LHI, the left hemisphere interpreter, bless his heart, Gazzaniga has this theory of this explanation maker, but it really is just theoretical. He thinks there's a lot of evidence for it, but I don't think it's quite fully accepted among other neuroscientists. So if, in fact, Homo erectus had a left hemisphere interpreter, as we do, if we do, I think that it was a rudimentary one. Okay, so that was very definitely in the area of theory. The rest of it's pretty solid. All right, I just wanted to give you these two references at the beginning of the neuroscience part because Dixon et al. Is really, really good. And what it is, one of the best examples of is neuroplasticity. It's so complicated that I can't do it in a short period of time. What it talks about is the frontoparietal control network. And there's an A part and there's a B part, and the A part is linked to one other network called the DN, the default network. The B is connected to the DAN, default, well, I don't know, can't remember. But anyway, I was reading this thing and I said, oh, well, this is perfect. This network handles our introspective processes as we use in religious thinking. This is great. And the other network combination handles those things that are outside of us, when we're focused our attention outside of us. Well, guess what? It's not that simple. They both do both. And so the demonstration that they both do both sets of networks, is really a gorgeous example of human neuroplasticity, which is what I've gotten so interested in. Okay, Hicks, that's a really interesting thing. Hicks is the grad student of Coolidge, and this thing has not been published yet. It's a sheet on ResearchGate, but they thought through what the parietal lobes do. And they do this special kinds of thinking, and what they didn't do is go that final step, which is the comparable kinds of thinking in theological thinking. The imagination of supernatural realms, the imagination of supernatural beings, and our discussions with them, and their discussions among each other. So I put that there because it's a really good example of cognitive thinking, cognitive science thinking, that doesn't quite go into religion. And that's been one of our big surprises, that people haven't taken cognitive science and gone the full Monty with it. Okay. Oh boy. Yeah, I can't do too much on it, okay? It's too much. There's so much in this book. What do I really want to say about this? What I really want to say is that our model shows that Homo erectus probably had some kind of ritual, some kind of drumming, some kind of dancing, but he didn't have the precuneus, which are part of the parietal lobes, that we have, which governs music. And so we think that Homo erectus was on the way to being religious, that he had moral thinking, moral arbitration, as Chris described. But he didn't have the parietal lobes, the cerebellum developed. He didn't have the precuneus expanded, which gives us this nice round skull. I mean, the main things that give us our round skull are our frontal lobes, our precuneus right here, and then back here, the cerebellum. All three of those are oh yeah, there's the precuneus. You can see it expanding. This is Bruner and Ericki, 2016. It's a really good article. And they do these projections that show if the precuneus expands, you get a globular skull. And of course, the globular skull, why is that so important? Because that is just about the best archaeological marker we've got. We don't have much better one than that. When did religion's thinking start? Well, I think it did gradually, with the gradual assumption of this globular skull. That's the best thesis I can think of. One of the reasons that I got interested in this is because I knew so much about South American mythology. And there's a portion of our book called Travel in Natural and Supernatural Space. And that's what the parietal lobes do. They govern our travel in space. When you're driving your car, walking in the park. But they also govern our travel in supernatural space, too. I mean, some South American Indians have these very elaborate systems. I mean, ours is simple. We've got heaven, we've got earth, we've got hell, right? Well, they have, 4 or 5 layers, and they're little pockets where people go from one layer to another layer. It's very intricate. It's very much passed down from one generation to the other. It's their theology, just like we have a theology. Most of us have a Judeo-Christian theology. So what we really did was we took cognitive science results and we said, okay, how is this portrayed in theological thinking? And we found an awful lot of similarities all over the world. And then, I think the last thing I want to mention is just numinous states. Because when we really come down to it, what are you pointing at? Oh, numinous states, the bottom right, okay. The pursuit of the numinous seems to be something that humans want to do. They want to have a connection with the supernatural. Now, I know the supernatural has become an old-fashioned word. I like it because it's the opposite of the natural. And so that is one of the similarities that I think is guided by the precuneus. When the precuneus deactivates, like you get too much smoke in the room, you don't have a lot of oxygen, you get kind of dreamy, and people get a little loopy. And this happens to me when I go to church with Chris. I sit there. No, it's true. And I'm a Presbyterian, right? And all this nice music is going on, and the children are sweet, and everybody's kind, and there's so much music, and I get kind of dreamy feeling, Now then, we feel that the pursuit of the numinous in that variety is just the same as voodoo. Just the same as hyperexcited states all over the world, or hypoexcited states, such as your Buddhist monk. He goes down, way, way down, and I don't know how many of you have meditated, but you can really go into some wonderful places when you meditate. It's very, very nice. So I think there's more to be done. The work to be done, I think, is to identify those brain networks, just like your frontoparietal control network, A and B, and the DN and the DAN, and identify the networks that go along with these altered states. I think that's the work to be done. The other big piece of work to be done is to identify the genomics. We are eventually going to be able to pinpoint when religious thinking arose, because we're going to be able to see it in the genome. We haven't done Homo erectus genome yet. We will. We will. And we'll see it. We'll be able to connect the organs and the processes to certain genetic patterns. We'll be able to know, and you know something, it really doesn't matter a lot of this. We still enjoy going to church every once in a while, you know. And is that it? Do I have anything else to say?
Just our friend.
Oh, Homo erectus. Everybody, isn't he pretty? He's gorgeous. Tall, straight hunter, except he wasn't a big game hunter. He was more of a scavenger. And he had a brain like 1,000 to 1,100 cc's. Ours is 1,300, not that much bigger. So it was the parts of our brain that became expanded. It's all in the book. I don't know why anybody else has not done this. I know the last thing I'll end on. There's another book out that traces the origin, the evolutionary origin of religion on the basis of natural selection. And I've got to tell you, I don't think it works. You know, people have been trying to make natural selection work for religion, and it just doesn't, you know. And so what I did is I looked at the other population mechanism at the other end of natural selection, and that's genetic drift. Well, darn if that doesn't work, because humans, people, beings on the line to modern man got smaller and smaller and smaller, which means genetic drift was much more strong. Natural selection works in big populations, like we have now. Genetic drift works in small populations. So I think some things were retained. Well, I know some things were retained that give us some of the diseases we have now. But maybe, just maybe, we like this numinous thing. We have this pursuit of the numinous because it popped up by accident and it was retained. It might have looked a little strange at first. You know, this guy likes to kind of check out, you know, talk to the gods, you know. But it kept on. It stayed with us. And, you know, we have a lot of things in our biology, in our genome that aren't good. We've got schizophrenia, we've got autism, we've got a lot of things. Other mammals don't have those things. And there's some good articles about, you know, stuff left over. Okay, I'm done. What?
Story.
Oh, the story. Oh, well, they don't want to hear the story. They want to ask questions, Chris.
Story
You want the
or ask
story?
questions?
Okay, all right. We told you that you were going to be able to pick the story, and we lied. And the reason we lied is that we can't do the one for Homo sapiens. It's on compassion. And I cannot read it and not weep. I can't do it. I can't get through it. You know, I read it to Chris and my husband one night, and, you know, I just can't get it. So this is the other one. Oh, where do I start? And where are you? You come in. I don't want to go over you.
And then I come in.
Okay, I got you. 900,000 years ago in Africa, East Africa, Bo was hungry. His mother complained that he was hungry these days, and she joked that he grew a little bit every day. He was already taller than his father. His mother had another child and was busy feeding her. But his Nana, his mother's mother, slipped him morsels of meat and nuts when no one was looking. That's your grandmother hypothesis, right? With a stride that had grown smoother while he grew taller, Bo rounded a copse of trees and headed along a worn path through a tall brown grass. He decided that morning to visit a spot where he knew some wild pigs lived. He hoped to be able to snatch a piglet if he was lucky, or maybe he would run across the carcass of a larger pig that had been killed by one of the cats. This was dangerous business, since the cat might still be around, and he ought to take not to take such a thing on without one of his age mates, Abba, or even Seer. He stopped to think a moment and grabbed a rock, turning it around in his smooth brown hand. He had only 2 years of practice in making the stone axes that the adult men used to slice apart the kills that the other animals made. He might need a sharp stone cutter if he was lucky today, but he knew he didn't yet have the skill to make one. Still, if he came upon some meat and didn't have some way to butcher it, the band would never believe him. They would laugh at his story and tell him it wasn't true. It was just his wishing it to be true. He tossed the rock aside and picked up another one that was already cracked. It occurred to him to strike it with the discarded rock, so he retrieved it and struck the second rock hard with the full swing of his right arm. Unbelievably, it cracked again, leaving him a sharp, jagged edge. It was unfinished, but it would have to do. The sun grew high in the sky as he neared a group of pigs, foraging noisily off to the right in a stand of bushes where a small stream ran. Bo felt his heart began to beat faster as he slowed his approach. He saw no buzzards and assumed there was nothing for him to scavenge. To get a piglet, he would have to be patient and very quick. Bo took up position downwind from the group of foraging pigs and waited. Silent, still, the sharp-edged rock in his right hand, he waited, and finally his patience paid off. A tiny piglet strayed from the group. Bo thought for a moment that the piglet would follow the smell of the group, like it should, but for some reason, it didn't. Stupid pig.
He pounced. He grabbed the pig tightly and hit him hard on the head, whereupon the piglet became limp. Bo felt no joy, only satisfaction that he would be roasting the piglet and telling the story of his accomplishment to the others. If the firekeepers had managed to keep the flame from last year's lightning strike alive. Otherwise, he'd divide the meat between the campfires and give a bit to each one to eat raw. He walked back toward the camp, the limp piglet in his grasp. He had been away from camp for quite a while, and the sun was beginning its slow arc toward evening. His friend Abba met him with a surprised expression. "You hunted alone?" Bo nodded, the concern beginning to show on his face. He raised the half-shaped stone tool as weak support for his actions. He had been ready, but really only half ready. 2 elders followed Abba and confronted Bo. You hunted alone? One asked. I was hungry, Bo replied. You should not hunt alone away from the camp. We will need you in the future. You should not take a risk like that. Bo nodded, the enormity of his actions beginning to dawn upon him. He might have wanted to satisfy his immediate hunger, but the group needed him more to feed them all. He understood that. It was an understanding that had begun to weigh heavily upon him in the past year. There we go. You could have died, one of the elders said roughly. Bo nodded again, more deeply than the first time. The two elders withdrew to the side to confer. Off to the right he saw his Nana approach, and she joined them. Why didn't you call me to go with you? Abba implored. Bo glanced towards the elders and saw his Nana speaking. Then she fell silent and nodded. The elders approached Bo, and the one who had not spoken turned to him. You will forfeit the piglet, he said with regret. The portions will go to the other campfires. Do not scavenge alone. We cannot lose you. Bo slumped, but he nodded. He knew he had made a mistake, one that he wouldn't make again. Next time, he would take both Abba and Sia with him. They would tell the elders where they were going. He still knew where the pigs could be found, and next time, they would take a bigger one.
You can see the elements of moral arbitration in that story very nicely, and maybe some of its original origins.
Language, we've been commented on. Well,
Oh yeah, language.
Yeah,
Go
but who knows? They had some way of communicating. Obviously, we tried to write that story with the shorter sentences, but they would have had some way of communicating, and that Bo knew darn well that he'd done wrong and what the right behavior in order for the good of his group was going to be. So, yeah.
See, Homo erectus came along about 1.9 million years ago. And the latest evidence of fire is not at 1, where it was when we started, but at 1.5. So he went along maybe for 400,000 years, 500,000 years without fire. But I think that it doesn't make sense that Homo erectus eventually did better tools, marched out of Africa all the way over to the Far East, all the way up into Europe without any language at all. It doesn't make sense. And most people think that too. Now, was it a rudimentary language? Maybe when it first began. But most people think, about 1 million years ago, you had full grammatical language. And I had a real tete-a-tete with some physician, about this. And, he just thought it was crazy. And I thought, but it really does seem, when you look at all of the social structure behind it, Chris mentioned as old as 40. Some people...
Margaret, this may be part of the discussion.
Oh, their discussion. Oh, I'm
Yes.
sorry. Okay, but we did want to mention the language because it is controversial. No doubt about it. We don't know when it started. We will know when it starts though. We will. It will either be written in our genome or it will be written in a genome that we sequence from Homo erectus eventually. Okay. Yeah.
All right, so thank you very much. Very interesting to go back that many years, right? Yes, and to think about how things are. So, how things were. Now, we would like you to take a few minutes to chat with your neighbors. So if you just, form little circles, we're trying to make them like 3 chairs and 2 chairs. So if you turn around, you can probably make a circle of about 4. And then just, talk about what you've heard and what questions you might have and what comments you'd like to make. And in a few minutes, we'll call you back and we'll let Chris and Margaret take over again. So good evening. How about if we come back again together? And I'll have the microphone here. I can take it around if you would like to make a comment or ask a question. Wow. Please feel free.
Thank you very much for the fascinating story and the weaving all these different elements. But I have a question. There is significant data that you're providing, and but in terms of the actual archaeological data we have, for example, the appearance, for example, of the cult of the dead, burials, for example, only appeared around 50,000 BC. And the cave paintings, where we start seeing the rudimentary of storytelling, only appears about 50,000 BC. And before that, the tools that Homo erectus and the early Homo sapiens did were mostly tools that were more weapons, and we don't see any other kind of evidence. So what is the evidence that you're using to draw these conclusions about the sophistication of the conceptual sophistication that you're presenting?
Saying as far back as they're saying.
Right. Is
it not working here? You take this one and
I don't know. Maybe it's just
testing. Yeah, this is okay.
okay. What we did was we tried to look at a couple of different databases. One was paleoneurology, that is, the study of the changes in the brain on the human line. And then we looked at the same time at the cognitive science literature. And the best example is one I gave you too quickly, I'm sorry, and that was the Precuneus. If you look at the research on the Precuneus and all the things it does,
Oh, I'm sorry.
and then you look at a church service on Sunday, your pastor or priest couldn't come up with those thoughts without some of the faculties that the Precuneus gives you. The self-consciousness, the introspection, the conceptualization of non-factual spaces. They wouldn't come from anywhere. You wouldn't have the brain architecture to do it. So when we looked at that, I went to the archaeology literature and said, okay, what kind of indicator do we have that we have a bigger Precuneus and expanded parietal lobes, the whole thing? And that was the globe-shaped skull. And Brunner, who did this work, is the biggest proponent of that expansion giving rise to the globe-shaped skull. Now, people have come along since 1916 and said, listen, it's also the cerebellum right here. And so there's whole sections in our book on the cerebellum and what it does for innovation and intelligence. We used to think the cerebellum just, coordinated our walking, But the cerebellum does a heck of a lot more than that. And it only happened in 3 orders of mammals. Anyway, so, and then the frontal lobes, the expansion of the frontal lobes. So that's what we did, is we compared what the brain parts do from cognitive science. And we looked at the archaeological paleoneurology and saw what was happening over time. And then we looked at the real archaeology and said, okay, what's some kind of marker? And right now, the best one that I could find was the globular-shaped skull. Now, what's really interesting about the globular-shaped skull is that it doesn't appear all at once. We now have the globe-shaped skull back to a little over 300,000 years ago. So somehow between 400,000 and 300,000 years ago, you got Homo sapiens. Now then, in another work, another article, Bruner says it didn't stabilize till 150 to 120,000. That it was, different amounts of globularization. Blah. So that's the best I can do now. Mm-hmm. But I think it's pretty darn good. I think it triangulates some cognitive science, some paleoneurology, some stones and bones archaeology. And then we go into some genomics in the book, too. There are not very many genes.
Yeah, there's a lot of that, too.
No fair.
Margaret can certainly give a wonderful lecture on that. And I don't know, what you're looking for is artifacts, aren't you? And the short answer is no, they're not there to indicate. What obviously Margaret was beautifully pointing out is the apparatus seemed to be there that we use today for our religion. The assumption from the paleoneurology there. But the other thing that popped into my mind is that Ethiopia, Homo idaltu, around 160,000 years ago, with the human skulls that were defleshed carefully and are in a polished state. I'm not saying, there's how were they polished? Were they polished by being carried in a leather, carrier, and that's how they got polished. So there's some reverence that he's keeping the human skulls about them, whereas obviously the hippos around there were slaughtered and were hacked at, and they didn't treat the hippo skulls in quite the same way. So that's about the only, as it were, artifact there.
Name again, Homo sapiens idaltu.
Homo sapiens, so, like one of us, idaltu, so not sapiens, around 160,000 years ago in Ethiopia. We've also got a little story about that as well.
Anyone else? Just a minute. George?
Is any of the research on the brain being conducted at the Paul Allen Brain Institute here in the Western United States?
I beg pardon, I didn't hear the question.
Is any of the research on the brain being conducted at or by the Paul Allen Brain Institute, I believe in
don't know.
California?
I don't know.
They certainly have enough money to do it.
One of the things I was going to say is that we want things. We want things out of the ground that will tell us what happened. One of the things we distinguish is, at the beginning of our book, is we're looking at religious thinking and not religious behavior. For one thing, religious behavior can be faked. And what we're looking at is what is it in our brains that allows us to conceive of the supernatural and take sustenance from the numinous. Yes, sir.
Here, take the microphone. It's better for us.
Yeah. There's some suggestion that the numinous quality of experience may have something to do with us having the dual brain processing systems. Do you believe that that's true? true, that it's legitimate, that we have two separate processing systems, one that seems to be more ancient and faster and associative, and another one that's more newer and linear and logical, and that may have a role with religious or spiritual experience?
Thanks.
I think that I will go you much farther, which is that it's not simply that there's one old and one new. It's that this network gets exapted for a new purpose on the right side of the brain, and the left side of the brain has the old function. And this network up here gets exapted for something else and connects to that one, and that dual network does something completely different. This is this infancy, the network, brain networks, and how they operate in combinations. I mean, I would love to know what goes on in the brain of somebody in voodoo trance. I really would. My mentor at Ohio State studied, she never called it voodoo, she called it vaudin. She called it the French word. She wasn't going to say voodoo. But that's what she studied. Her whole life was altered states of consciousness. I would love to know what brain networks operate. But I would like to know what brain networks operate in me when I go to church with Chris, yes.
Okay, I have a very basic question. Am I correct in that you're equating the little story you gave us, the concept of teaching societal morals equates to a religion?
No.
No. Okay, so how do you...
We're saying that Homo erectus, we believe, had some form of moral arbitration.
Okay.
And that Homo erectus did not have the brain architecture for religion. And as far as we can see, the only being that has the brain architecture for religion is us. Now then, did Neanderthal? This is yet an unanswered question. It's way out there. And some evidence came in while we were writing the book that the fork between Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis was definitely back as far as 800,000 years ago. That's a long time. If Neanderthal had any form of religious thinking, that's pushing it back, you see, potentially, not really, I mean, potentially to 800,000 years ago, because it means they shared something, you know, and we both got it. I don't know, poor Neanderthal, they've had such a rough go lately, you know. I don't know. Go ahead.
Here, let me give you the microphone. You all want to hear you.
The Neanderthal, as I understand part
Right.
of it, that separates us, is relatively simplistic, is the Homo sapiens, we Homo sapiens became social, and we expanded our social circles, where the Neanderthal were much more
Inward looking.
Inward, and they would have, their groups were smaller.
Right.
And they didn't reach out to other groups.
Right.
And they, so interbred a lot, I guess, and that may be part of it. But it's the thing about us is, our brain is that we do have this social brain, which then
Right.
also involves the ability for religious experience and
Right.
numinosity and stuff. And the Neanderthals also, from what I've read, their tools kind of remained the same over time. In other words,
Right.
the Homo sapiens would improve on tools, but the Neanderthals' tools over time, this is just things they find. It's not
Right.
the kind of thing you were talking about.
Right.
But I don't know.
I don't think, between you and me and the light post, that Neanderthals had the same quality of religious thinking that we do. I think they couldn't have. And the last example in our chapter on dual functioning. It is that brain organs do this to help us economically, and the same brain organ does that to help us religiously. It's not these special brain organs. I mean, the precuneus and the parietals do things that help us hunt and take care of our families and all this stuff. But Neanderthals, well, Chris told me not to bring this up. There's a study. There's a study that shows that one of the things that goes along with the flatter skull of the Neanderthal is a certain gene. And that gene seems to be related inversely to the presence of something called the hate circuit or the contempt circuit cognitively. And
Neanderthals were nice people.
yes. No, but they were. I mean, that's the problem. I mean, they were too nice. I mean, I ended the section, I said, was the wolf at the door, and they let the wolf in. In other words, I don't think Neanderthals may have been as socially sensitive. There's all kinds of social sensitivity.
Socially defensive.
Yeah, there are genes for all kinds of social sensitivity. I mean, we identified 3 in our book. And that one may have made humans, our line, more suspicious of others. More suspicious. And Neanderthals were just too nice a guy, you know, they weren't that self-protective. They were very small groups, and they didn't bury usually their dead deeply and well. That's all I've got to say. I don't want to say anything bad
All right.
about me.
George has
They're
another
our
question.
Cousins.
Let's let him do the last one tonight.
Questions that was brought up at our group was, how do you make the jump from skull to genome or vice versa? What is the process by which one can determine what genome does this or does that?
A lot of research. I mean, really, people, and a lot of very recent research. What's the thing in Germany? Institute for the Evolutionary Anthropology. Is it in Leipzig? What is it? Max Planck, yeah.
Max Planck, yeah.
Yeah. That, I mean, they did this UBR4 thing with the Pudeman. And he didn't suggest that. Gunst did not suggest that. This is my idea. You know, they didn't go far and say, oh no, they didn't discuss the hate circle and all that. But I was looking for some behavioral indication. But it's really very difficult work. I mean, it's just amazing what people are doing right now. And they're young people, and the research designs are extremely creative. The guy who came up with this business about UBR4 it was the design of the study was really quite good. Anyway, I think we've talked enough. here.
Yes, and I want to thank you very much for, and how about you? Do you want to say one more thing? No?
That's fine. That's fine.
But I think we
I've
want
only nice things to say about Neanderthals. There we go.
I just was
But-
saying to
but-
Marge, I'm not a Neanderthal now, I know.
Neanderthals have gotten such a bad rap.
Yeah, that's what you were saying too.
but they hunted differently from sapiens. Yeah, sapiens.
Last thing about Neanderthal,
Yeah.
they did not have Euclidean geometry.
How
They did not navigate on a grid, okay? They navigated on a star. They had a center, and they went out, and they went out, and they went out.
Radial.
But they didn't have any interception strategies.
How about that? That's very interesting. Too much to take in, right? But I think we should really thank our speakers, our storytellers. our researchers. It's wonderful. And if you can get your hands on those Zion articles, you can learn more even, you know, and I think it...
One last thing.
One last thing.
We want to thank Andrew B. Newberg, D., who lives right here in Philadelphia, who is a series editor, for being so supportive and so kind.
That's right. And we know him too, right? Many of you, right? How many of you have heard Nandy here? Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, so, yeah, he's a good friend of ours.
And thank you.
Oh, and
Kathy.
thank you.
Thank
Thank you for coming.
invitation. Thank you.
It's great. All right, and thank you for coming, and come back again.